distinguished lecturer in South Asian Studies at Yale University, USA. She has been the John Bonner Fellow in Indology at Leiden University, Netherlands, and was also a Dart visiting professor at the Asian Institute, Heidelberg University, Germany. Obviously, regarding her publications, which is the most important one, Professor Kumar has already told us. I would just like to mention some of them. She had published 7 books so far, including the very important one, The Making of Early Kashmir, Landscape and Identity in the Rajtarangini, which was actually published by OUP, Oxford University Press, in 2018. Then we also have Imagining the Urban, Sanskrit and the City in Early India, published by Permanent Black in 2010. We have Culture History of Early South Asia, a reader. Then, of course, most recently, Eloquent Spaces, Meaning and Community in Early Indian Architecture. This was published by Routledge in 2019. There are also certain other books like Looking Within, Life Lessons from Lavred, The Kashmiri Sheva Mystique. Then you have Retelling Time, Alternative Temporalities from Pre-Modern South Asia, again published from Routledge in 2021. She has also contributed over 24 articles on Indian history and literature to international volumes and journals, including Cambridge World History, Encyclopedia of Historiography, History and Theory, Encyclopedia of Indian Religions, and also in Indian Historical Review. I'm sure the list will be endless. So today she'll be speaking on, as all of you know, on new approaches to regional history, the case study of early Kashmir. So we again formally welcome Dr. Kaul, and now the mic is over to Dr. Kaul to deliver her lecture. Before I conclude, we would request everybody to put your mobiles on the side.
Someone needs to tell me if I'm audible in the I don't think I'm audible. Anilji? I'm audible online, but I don't think I'm audible in your hall. Anilji, can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. Now you're audible.
Perfect. So namaskar and thank you very much. It is a sad but proud privilege for me to be delivering the second B.D. Chattopadhyaya Memorial Lecture at Shantiniketan. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in honor of a man, my PhD supervisor, whose work I personally believe is synonymous with not only rigor and depth, but an integrity, a non-aligned, non-dogmatic, yet fundamental rethinking of India's early past in ways that altered completely our understanding of it. A quiet and mild-mannered scholar, BDC, as we used to call him, admirably let his work do the talking for him, which is arguably how it should be. And one of the cornerstones of this work that he has left behind, this rich repertoire, is also the theme of my talk today. That is the region in early Indian history. Now, Professor Chattopadhyaya addressed the region in 2 ways. One, we know, in terms of a transition from emphasizing an epicenter like the Gangetic Valley to looking at regional state formations, a more diffused pattern of state formation. And he spoke of this transition as defining the shift to the early medieval from the early historic. So an altogether different way of speaking of the early medieval than what the late Professor R.S. Sharma had proposed in terms of Indian feudalism. And the second aspect of Professor Chattopadhyaya's engagement with the region was, of course, to look at sub-regional nodes and networks, localities, as he called them. that came together, according to him, to give rise to any region. All of this work was, we know, based primarily on material evidence, that is on archaeology and epigraphy in the main. Now, what I will be doing today is somewhat different. I will be looking at textual evidence for starters. Sorry, someone's mic is on. Yeah. So I will be looking at textual evidence for starters today, not really archaeological or epigraphic. And I'll be looking at the textual universe of the region, as it were, and how that textual universe created, fostered, and sustained a crucial sense of territorial identity and belonging. I will undertake this exercise in the context of early Kashmir, a much neglected region in historiography. And you will also note that though we are speaking of textual imaginaries, you will see the vivid materiality of the representation in this text that I will be speaking of. I'll tell you more about this. In the process of doing this, I will also propose 3 methodological advances for doing regional history, what I hope constitute advances. What are these 3? 1, redefining a region. What is a region? I will take up this vexed question pointing to the endemic difficulties, the built-in difficulties in asking and answering this question, but also the possibilities, the potentialities of exploring a region in the absence of any universal understanding of it. I will propose a new theoretical perspective on regions as discursively self-constituted. That's the first thing I'll be doing. 2, apart from redefining the region, we might also want to review the relationship between language and regions. So my talk will be drawing on, among the first Kashmiri articulations of regional selfhood, which is in Sanskrit, Kalhan's Raj Tarangani from the 12th century. Forging a homeland, the Raj Tarangani elaborated what I call a poetics of place, which implicated the sacred geography of the land, intertwined with a stringent critique of local politics. So these are the different trajectories we will be exploring today. We will see how. And meanwhile, the third and the final advance that we will explore today is recovering the role of myth and memory in writing a people's history of the region. So these are the 3 things that we will attempt to demonstrate in today's talk. So to begin with, what is a region? Now, that is a question that is deceptive in its simplicity. The more perceptive scholars have paused advisedly to consider what does it actually mean to speak of a region as a category of analysis. And Professor Chattopadhyaya made this point as well. Why? Because a region is not a given, nor has there been found to be any universally applicable, universally valid definition of it. And one reason for this is the inherently relational aspect of a region. A region is by definition a unit actually of something else, of something larger. So that something else could be anything. A second reason is also that there can be as many, like I was saying, as many different kinds of regions as objective criteria that we choose to privilege. So you can have linguistic regions, religious, ethnic, climatic, cultural, administrative regions, and so on and so forth. And not to mention what Bernard Cohn called subjective regions. This is perhaps the most fascinating. What are these subjective regions? These are areas of belief and belonging that may or may not coincide with any one or all of the criteria enumerated above. So a subjective region could have its own independent existence, as it were, not premised or not certainly predicated on any objective criteria necessarily. So in the middle of all this, what is this pointing us towards? It is suggesting what I mentioned is an endemic problem of definition, or certainly of a stable definition. An unvarying definition of a region, I don't think we have that because of these reasons. However, it is possible to invert this assessment and seize this uncertainty or variability as in fact pointing to a valuable insight. Namely, that a region does not possess or express any intrinsic meaning. So we have to accept this. Meaning, where does it come from then? Meaning is lent or constructed through discursive practices, chief among which is textualization performed by social actors. Thus, in my book, The Making of Early Kashmir, I offer the following potentially universal definition of a region. A land coming into meaning is the birth of a region. So regions are produced not just by material practices on the ground, like the drawing of boundaries or the erection of gateways, but perhaps even more powerfully by cultural practices of representation. This is what I argue. But what is culture? Now, culture has been understood very broadly as shared, again, meanings and values. And today we will attempt to identify just some of the values and meanings that were associated with early Kashmir and the literary strategies that were employed to that end. And we're going to do it chiefly through the medium of an iconic textual representation composed by a Kashmiri in 1148 CE. This is Kalhan's Raj Tarangini. I'm sure you've all heard of it. An epic Sanskrit Mahakavya or Prabandha running into nearly 8,000 verses and covering some 2,000 years of Kashmiri history at the very least. The Raj Tarangani deserves to be the medium of what we are trying to do today, of our investigation, because apart from the Nilmad Puran, the earlier Nilmad Puran, which came in the 7th century, apart from that, Kalhan's Raj Tarangani is Kashmir's earliest and most enduring articulation of regional self-awareness and identity. So if that's what we are investigating, that how does a region come about in the sense of a place of belonging and becoming, then there can be no better text than the Raj Tarangani, and yet it has not exactly been studied with these questions in mind. It has typically been regarded as a political work and used only for reproducing long lists of dynasty after dynasty that ruled over Kashmir, whereas the text actually has so much more to offer. Now, the significance of the Raj Tarangani is also this, that it prompts a re-examining of the relationship between language and expressions of space in pre-modern India. Moving beyond the very influential binary of cosmopolitan and vernacular literary cultures that was authored by Sheldon Pollock, the Raj Tarangani, which is a classic representation of regional space, is in the cosmopolitan Sanskrit and not in the vernacular tongue Kashmiri. In fact, as I explained in my book, Kashmiri does not take off as a language of regional expression till much later. So that too is actually a serious critique of Pollock's formulation, and it needs accounting for. Why does Kashmiri lag behind, as it were, in terms of state patronage, in terms of becoming the preeminent language of, say, the court or administration or literature? And one of the major reasons is that after Sanskrit, Persian appears on the scene as this second cosmopolitan language that then acquires this tremendous prestige and utility as the language of administration and so on. And therefore, Kashmiri's position as such gets relegated to other spheres, if at all. So basically, the Raj Tarangani is providing a stunning exception to this hypothesis of cosmopolitan versus vernacular languages. And I argue that it is in fact an example of how Sanskrit Kavya adopted and adapted local Kashmiri motifs, locales, and content to a translocal poetics. And I call this phenomenon the cosmopolitan as the vernacular. So in this paper, I will explore how the Raj Tarangani transformed really an abstract space into a specific, intimate place. So the journey from space to place is performed by actors like Kalhan in the history of Kashmir. I chart the Raj Tarangani's representation of the physical features of the land, but not only the physical features, also the range of cultural constructions put on these through myth and memory. That is geography, which is overlaid with narrative. And this act of overlaying the geography with a narrative yielded a rootedness in the land and encoded it with culturally specific meanings. So in this perspective that I will be employing, myth is not history's primeval other, but a very special kind of historical strategy insofar as it inscribed and memorialized geographical places and stitched them to time. And I'll show you what I mean. True to the pan-Indian pattern, mythology and geography in Kashmir were a joint imaginative and descriptive undertaking. And here I'm quoting Diana Eck's work on the Indian subcontinent as a whole. It applies completely to Kashmir as well. Geography and mythology, a joint imaginative and descriptive undertaking. Now, these myths that I'm invoking, they could be local lore, or they could be derived subcontinentally from epic and Puranic archetypes, weaving together gods, demigods, kings, peoples, and places. They filled out and lent tradition to Kashmir, these stories, these memories, anchoring and orienting the people of Kashmir not only to their own physical world, but also to the moral that inhered in these constructed and preserved memories. And of course, I'll show you exactly what I mean. And given that landscape is manifested narration, the key to the Raj Tarangani's portrayal of Kashmir as a deeply sacred geography is also, I will argue, to provide a synergistic backdrop against which Kalhan's ethicized political commentary could unfold. So what am I doing? I am arguing for 3 layers to the Raj Tarangani's signification of the region of Kashmir: the topographic, the mythic narrative, and on top of that, the discursive. And we'll very quickly chart these 3. So we see a number of practices of place operating in the Raj Tarangani. There is an identifiable sense of chronicling a distinct spatial unit or region known as Desha or Mandala in the text, with which the author identifies himself and his protagonists. He uses terms in different contexts like Swadesha and Janmabhoomi and so on. Kalhan deploys several markers of this place, which seem to be nebulous natural phenomena that exhibited an omnipresence in the valley. Now, what natural phenomena are we speaking of? The foremost of these are the waters of Kashmir. Water is the originary motif in the heavily Puranic, cosmogonic account of the valley that the Raj Tarangani replays. What is this account? It speaks of the Sati Saras, the lake of Sati, the land in the womb of the Himalayas filled with water for 6 manvantaras. Here I'm quoting from the text. This primordial lake, when drained by the gods at the behest of sage Kashyapa and rid of the resident idol demon Jalodbhava, came to be the site where the Mandala of Kashmir was founded. This is what the Rajtarangani, first Taranga, verses 25 to 27 tells us. And the Nilmad Puran before that, incidentally, is telling you the same thing. Now, the very name Kashmir is supposed to be carrying within it the syllable for water, which is Ka. And the Nilmad Puran is telling us this. So that water then is seen as performing a metonymic function for the land. Now, this is the first of several myths in Kalhan's narrative, which relates the physiography of Kashmir to tradition, combining geology and tradition. For we know that the geomorphological formation of the valley did occur from an ancient lake. This is what the geologists have told us. And clearly this is mind-boggling, but a memory that is preserved in myth. And what's even more interesting is that this is actually the myth of origin that you find in several places across the Himalayas. And we know that the Himalayas have actually risen through a variety of seismic and oceanic movements. So it's fascinating that our texts and our traditions should have knowledge of that and represent it in this fundamental fashion as a myth of origin. What's more, the valley did not drain out completely from this primordial lake. And in fact, a number of residual lakes and pools have remained in Kashmir. These are known as Nagas. So they're known as Nagas even today. In Kashmiri, they're known as Nagas as well. And so in the Rajtarangani too, Kashmir is described as the resort of the Nagas, the territory under the protection of Nila, supreme lord of the Nagas, whose parasol, the Chhatra, is the swelling Nila Kunda, which is modern Verinag. And the flowing waters of the Vitasta is its staff, the Dandin. So the Dandin and the Chhatra, which is the ruling and ensigns of the king of the Nagas, is nothing but the Nilakunda, which is the origin of the Jhelum river. And I will show you images of this. And the Vitasta is, of course, Jhelum herself. So these are being documented as early as the 7th and the 12th century CE as fundamental, as foundational to what Kashmir is. In fact, we do get a sense of the land of Kashmir being the one that is traversed by the Vitasta river, by Jhelum. And Vitasta herself is associated in the Rajtarangani with the goddess Parvati, whom she is said to embody. So Kalhan tells us, Parvati Yatra Vitasta. And as the scholar Anne Feldhaus has pointed out, this imagery of a river as a human or a divine body serves to bring together various places along the river in a conceptual unity. So I will show you later the map of Kashmir and how the Jhelum actually flows from the southeast up to the northwest and then taking a sudden turn down towards the Indus. So it actually is something of an artery of the valley, as it were. Now, the first Taranga of the Rajtarangani then proceeds with the casting of a bird's eye over the rest of the physiography of Kashmir. So her identity with mountains is declared upfront. It is called the country magnificent with its mountains. And the king of Kashmir is described as, quote, guardian of the mountains, to whom the mighty Himalayas, father of Parvati, pays homage. Now, this would count not simply as a naturalistic reference, because of course we know Kashmir is an intermontane valley, but this is also a symbolic reference. Why? Because the Himalayas are typically imbued with mythic sanctity in India. So asserting this claim to sacred terrain would then ring particularly true for Kashmir and simultaneously serve to create a sense of place. Because Kashmir is the Himalayas, and the double meaning that is implied here is that Kashmir is deeply sacred. The Puranic influence, again, is at work in Kalhan's scheme to sanctify the entire topography by merging the physical geography with sacred geography. What do I mean? A description of the rivers and lakes and mountain peaks of Kashmir is interspersed seamlessly in the Raj Tarangini with an enumeration of the many tirthas. Tirthas, as you know, are the shrines, they are the pilgrimage spots. And in Kashmir, they are typically accompanying these naturalistic features, the physical features, the rivers, the confluences, the mountain peaks, the lakes. Exemplifying a highly locative worldview, thus, we are told of the tirthas of Papasudan. So there's a naming, there's a mapping and a naming of very real places in Kashmir. Papasudan, which is modern village Kothar, Nandi Kshetra, which is the peak Harmukh, Chakrabhrit, modern Sakhtar, Vijayesh or Vijbror in Kashmiri, also known as Bij Bihara, you may have heard of that. Then the Pithas of Adikeshava, Ishana, hill of the goddess Sharada, near the confluence of the rivers Madhumati and Saraswati. This is modern Neelam village in Pak-occupied Kashmir, just across the line of control. And the Bhedagiri mountain, atop which resides goddess Saraswati as a swan in a lake. That's what Kalhan tells us. So all these different shrines which are dispersed across the valley, and I will show you a map. I have attempted to make a map which actually plots the location of these different tirthas named by Kalhan 900 years ago. And then you will see how the valley emerges, how it comes into high relief, as it were, thanks to this description. Now, why am I listing this long list for you? Because I'm trying to tell you that there is a very purposive act here by Kalhan. Naming shrines was also a practice of place, a practice of place making. And it meant mapping a world that was linked by these shrines, making possible a sense of this entire area as one region. So what are we getting here? Sanctification was a means to ends that were not merely sacred. I repeat that. Sanctification, patent sanctification of the geography was a means to ends that were not merely sacred. They were instead a powerful technique of mental map making. And this is how this text is actually enacting and bringing into being, as it were, the region of Kashmir, populating and peopling it with very real features of the land. Now, in sum, we are told by Kalhan, quote, in that country adorned by these tirthas, there is not so much land as covered by a sesamum seed that is profane, unquote. Sorry for the awkward translation. I'm citing from Pandit, but essentially what he's saying is that this land is dotted so profusely with these sacred places, the tirthas, that there's not space equivalent to even a til, even a tiny seed of sesamum that is profane, that is not sacred. Now, this close rhetorical association of the very land of Kashmir with spiritual merit, I argue, serves a double purpose in and for the Raj Tarangini. I argue that it initiates a discourse of punya papanam anvaya vyatihi. That is the presence of piety and the absence of sin, as Kalhan calls it. And this discourse was perhaps meant to set the stage for Kalhan's ethicized commentary to unfold. And I'll show you precisely how. But first, very quickly, another force of nature that characterizes the space of Kashmir in the Raj Tarangini, and of course on the ground, is heavy snowfall, Mahahimpata, and also the drought that accompanies untimely the blight of snowfall. Mahaghora, terrible blight, we are told about. Now, interestingly, precipitation is represented as a variant of Kashmir's obsession with the water motif that we have been speaking about till now. And it is presented as the doings of the Nagas we spoke about, as tutelary spring deities. So the Nagas are these they reside in the springs, in the lakes of Kashmir, and they are deemed some kind of demigods. And therefore the snowfall is understood as wreaked by the Nagas of Kashmir. So typically, where is this going to take us? Very quickly, we are going to move to an association of this snowfall with notions of justice. The justice that is dispensed by the Nagas. So sure enough, in the Raj Tarangani, we find that snowfall is associated with quasi-divine justice when it comes down to punish, as it were, whom? Different characters across this sprawling text, but this one particular incident I want to tell you is where bhikshus, the bhikshus in the kingdom are being punished according to the Raj Tarangani by the Nagas by heavy snowfall. And why is this being done? What are they being punished for? Because they have extinguished the ritual order of the Nagas. Let me tell you a little bit more. Let me quote from the text. So in the first Taranga, Kalhan is telling us he's describing a time roughly around the reign of the Kushanas. And he says, when the kingdom of Kashmir was, for the most part, an appanage of the Buddhists, who were opponents of the Vedas, and having defeated all the learned men in open debate, had cut at the root of the religious rites prescribed in the Nilmat Purana. There is some chronological complication going on here, because we know the Nilmat is a little later than the advent of Buddhism in Kashmir. Anyhow, he goes on to say, the country having drifted into confusion about the customary observances, vilupt achara, the Nagas, whose sacrificial offerings had been cut off, caused loss of human life by heavy falls of snow. Later, however, King Gonanda of Kashmir restored the performance, I'm still quoting, restored the performance of pilgrimages, sacrifices, and other worship of the Nagas, Yatra Yagadi Naganam, such as was customary in the past. When the king had once more promulgated these observances, the peril from the bhikshus and the peril from snowfall abated everywhere. Unquote. Clearly, here is a memory of ritual traditions in conflict and the resultant cultural confusion, which is consciously brought into correlation with an endemic natural phenomenon, snowfall. Restoration of the Puranic ritual order was accompanied by the normalization also of the ritual order. So there's a parallel that is constantly being asserted between the natural and the human, as it were. Now, and this is all deeply historical. It may appear to be a myth that is being spoken of, but it is giving us crucial historical insights. The centrality of the Nagas to the mythology of Kashmir is well known. Some of you also may have heard of it. But what is less clear is whether the Nagas can be said to symbolize, like some scholars have suggested, any social group. Because some scholars, without references really, have speculated that perhaps these are original inhabitants of Kashmir, these Nagas. I argue, however, that it would be much more appropriate to the varied portrayals of the Nagas in the Raj Tarangani. So they are sometimes deities, sometimes they are lords of the land, kings of Kashmir. At other times, they are mere serpents. They're physically serpents. And at yet other times, they are personified water bodies and precipitation. So I think given this variety in their representation in the text, it is more appropriate to regard them as a motif or a literary device. Fluid, changeable, ubiquitous, yet revered. The Nagas were classic myth builders in Kashmir, myth builders. And the landscape of Kashmir is also enacted through their physical and moral agency. What do I mean by that? Let me narrate to you yet another short story from the Rajtarangini. Here we have the story of Sushravas Naga. And this story is described by Kalhan as the legend recalled by the people to this very day. Adyapi katheyam smaryate janai. Now this formula, I want to draw your attention to this. Adyapi, even today. How something is recalled even today. And Kalhan keeps saying this throughout his narrative, throughout his 8,000 verses. This comes up again and again. So what is this doing? This is actually invoking the present to corroborate the past, right? Adyapi, today, is being invoked to corroborate the past, and indeed as a guarantor of verity itself. So the fact that this is recalled till today, this story is recalled till today, is given by Kalhan as proof of the veracity of this story. So he's actually invoking a certain continuity of memory as a guarantor of historical truth. Now, with this formula, what it is doing is it's actually weaving together the past and the present through the agency of popular memory. I also want to emphasize that these are not some high elite memories that he's talking of. The oral character of these tales, right? So the terms used, katha, katheyam, janashruti, varta, all of these indicating something that is spoken. And janashruti, heard by the people. And he keeps invoking this, as I said, throughout the text. Now, I believe that these oral characters, these tales in the Rajtarangini, point to what I call a civilizational centrality of storytelling in Kashmir. I'll repeat that. A civilizational centrality of storytelling in Kashmir. Now, I said before that the Rajtarangini has been understood as political or dynastic history typically, elite history, and so on. But in the process, the several popular or subaltern elements have been completely missed in this text. And they are actually very rich. They're very productive of telling us about the actual processes in Kashmir, both cultural and historical. So coming back to our Naga, coming back to Sushravas, what is the story? Sushravas' daughter, Chandralekha, married to a Brahmin, is cited and coveted by the wicked king Kinnara of Kashmir. So the human king of Kashmir covets the daughter of the Naga king, who is already married, by the way. So she's a married woman. So that's a double offense, as it were. When this king attempts to carry away this girl, carry off this girl by force, the couple, Chandralekha and her husband, they seek asylum at Sushravas' abode. And what is Sushravas' abode? He's a Naga, so his abode is a pool, right? It's a lake. Then what happens? Quote, then the lord of the Nagas, blind with rage, sallied forth from the pool. Having caused a blinding darkness from the fearful clouds which thundered, he burnt down the king together with the city by a terrific shower of boulders. Thousands of human beings were burnt down in a trice. The sister of Sushravas, the Naga lady from a cave in the Ramanya mountain, also dropped a shower of boulders on the villages. 5 yojanas of rural land was thus laid waste and is known as Ramanyatavi. It is to even this day adyapi, full of heavy boulders and holes, unquote. The next day, however, Sushravas was full of remorse and leaving the locality, moved to a distant mountain where he built a lake, which is described as gleaming like the ocean of milk, Ksheerasagar. This lake, we are told, so Kalahan is telling us this 900 years ago, mind you, that this lake, quote, on their way to the pilgrimage of Amarnath, is visited by people to this very day, unquote. So again, look at the fascinating cultural continuity of at least 900 years, if not more, that is captured in this text. Because Kalhan in the 12th century is saying that till today, people see Sheshnag. So he is himself invoking many hundred years before him. And we know that the Amarnath Yatra and the Sheshnag, of course, are alive and well, even today in the 21st century. So this is, what is this white-watered lake in real terms in Kashmir? It is the famous Sheshanaga. And indeed it is white-watered. Please do have a look at images of it. And as I said, the Amarnath Yatra again is also very much in practice. So a remarkable nugget from the Rajtarangani. So this actually is representing the intangible yet founding heritage of Kashmir, as it were. And as I said, in tremendous continuity. We are also told that Sushravas' son-in-law, the Brahmin, he also built a lake in the same locality. And this is, Kalan says, celebrated as the lake of the son-in-law, Jamatri Sarasa. And what is the story? The story is an explanation for what the name of this twin lake with the Sheshnag is in Kashmiri today, and that is Zamatur Nag. So Jamatri Sarasa became Zamatur Nag in contemporary Kashmir. Now coming back from this world of story, what is it telling us? Here is a conception of the past as being everywhere. The past as literally scattered like the boulders and the lakes over multiple locales and narratives. Moreover, it is overlaid with a major moral lesson. So here is the geography, which is then overlaid with a moral tale. And what is that moral tale? Kalhan says, through passionate lust, protectors, that is kings, palakaha, often become destroyers of their own people. Why? Because of King Kinnara, Sushravasa destroys the whole city. And, quote, as a result of the anger of a virtuous woman, the gods, or a Brahmin, one hears in the accounts of the upheaval of the three worlds, unquote. So what's going on here? You can clearly see the moral message. This moral message was also meant to be remembered by people till today, Adyapi, when they see that landscape that is being described through this myth. This is what's going on here, the complex and subtle layers to the signification of the land of Kashmir through a text like the Rajtarangani. As Christopher Tilley put it, in narrative, geographical features of the landscape act as mnemonic pegs on which moral teachings hang. Mnemonic pegs, aids to memory. And what is being remembered here? Not merely the story of the origins of the geography of the land, but also the tale, the moral that inheres in that story. Other attributes and associations culturally specific to Kashmir are sprinkled all over the Rajtarangani. My book details them. They're very picturesque descriptions and they ring very true. I won't go into all of that, but I will cite the following miscellany of novel attributes of Kashmir that Kalhan gives us. Quote, such as Kashmir, the country which may be conquered by the force of spiritual merit, but not by armed force. Vijiyate punya balair balair yattuna shastrina. And I'll come back to this. Why is this important? where the inhabitants fear more the next world. So they're God-fearing people. They're karma-fearing people. Where there are hot baths in winter, where realizing that the land created by his father is unable to bear heat, the hot red sun honors it by bearing himself softly even in summer. This sounds awkward in English, but the Sanskrit is beautiful. Learning, high dwelling houses, saffron, kumkum, iced water, grapes, and the like. What is a commonplace in Kashmir is difficult to secure in paradise. Unquote. Now, this reference to surpassing paradise is striking because it actually anticipates the later day construction of Kashmir as a paradisical space, Firdaus, right? In Persian literature itself. And here you have Kalhan, who is doing something similar. Above all, by compiling this highly place-specific, if you were listening closely to this miscellany, it's very, very place-specific. There's nothing far-fetched about these elements of Kashmir that he is describing. They're all very true. So this highly specific, place-specific and phenomenological eulogy, this is a very phenomenological eulogy of a mundane Kashmir. What Kalhan seems to be doing by this is fashioning a community of local sentiment, an ecology that is elaborated as a homeland. So again, you see the interweaving, the interplotting of naturalistic references with a larger imaginary that is being constructed of this land, that is Kashmir, which is home for Kalhan. Finally, the point to also note is that the movement from physical qualities of space to the spiritual ones is a continuum in the Rajtarangini. You just saw that in the description, right? It starts out with that claim about how it's a land that can be conquered only by spiritual merit. And then it goes on to describe the more physical, the more mundane aspects and features of the land. So apart from these claims to spiritual distinctiveness, we also have other kinds of descriptions which show that the spiritual characterization of Kashmir had actually a second political purpose and meaning. For example, the Rajtarangini has no less than Lord Krishna state the following, quote, "The land of Kashmir is Parvati. Know its king to be part of Shiva. Kashmiraha Parvati Raja Gyeyo Haransha Jaha. Hara Ansha, a part of Shiva. He should not be disregarded even if he be wicked by a wise man desirous of bliss." Unquote. So you have Krishna saying this in Rajtarangini and still earlier in the Neelmat as well. Of course, Kalhan is a staunch monarchist, but he has a thing or two to say about if a king is wicked, what should you do with him? So he has a very high sense of this ideal of honor, that you must still be honorable when dealing with a king, even if he is wicked. But at the same time, he of course is very, very hurt, very agitated, and shows great contempt for kings of Kashmir, who are in fact wicked in terms of persecuting the people. And Praja Pidanam is the term that he uses. So this is one kind of description you're getting. It's a very explicit one, that the association of the spiritual characterization with the political one, that Kashmir is Parvati and Krishna, and the king of Kashmir is a part of Shiva. But we are getting other kinds of descriptions that are telling us the same thing. We get all the kings of Kashmir from the first to literally the last. So right till the 12th century CE in the Rajtarangini, all these kings are painted in colors of piety. Pause your thought about that, because I just said there are wicked kings in Kashmir that Kalhan detests. So what happens to them? I'll tell you what happens to them. But for now, the many pious donations, what do I mean they're painted in colors of piety? Basically, the many pious donations and constructions by these kings, punya pratishtha, every single king after king for 2000 years, and often their queens, other kin, counselors, every punya pratishtha by these people is detailed ad nauseum in the Raj Tarangini. This is the single largest body of data that you're getting in this text. And trust me, I have read it verse for verse. What are these punya pratishtha? This is basically the founding of temples, mathas, but also viharas, stupas, agraharas, as well as the consecration of icons and anicons like Banalingas, Trishulas, and colossal bodhisattvas across the Kashmiri landscape. So there are the structures that are built, and then there are these anicons that are also consecrated just freehold across the landscape. And mind you, many of these have been found in modern contemporary times by Mark Orlstein when he undertook a geographical survey, and this is attested photographically as well. Giant Banalingas standing in the middle of this beautiful intermontane ecology, quite stunning, giant. And this is the typical characteristic of Kashmiri art, actually, that it is monumental. Even the sculptures are typically large. They are as tall as I am, if not higher. So coming back to what Kalhan is doing, he is listing how all these kings and queens and all that are doing these, pious activities. And so compulsive does this practice of piety appear in the Raj Tarangini that even kings and queens of terrible impiety, those who are presented as unscrupulous or mindless massacring tyrants, we are speaking of Mihirakula, we are speaking of Kalasha, we are speaking of the Queen Didda. This is how these people are represented in the Raj Tarangini. Even they are recorded by Kalhan as making donations to temples and viharas. So get this glimpse into the mind, into the complex mind that is Kalhan, when he comments on this incongruity by this hilarious statement. He says, Papinam api hanteyam kapi satkarma vasana. Even sinners, it is a marvel, have a peculiar longing to do good acts. Papinam api. So nobody is fool. He's not a credulous observer and mere documenter. No, there is commentary throughout the Raj Tarangini, and that really is my larger thesis on this text, and which has been completely missed. So why are these papi namapi? Why are they also indulging in this satkarma? The explanation appears to have been quite simply, as Ronald Inden says in a different context, theism with its liturgy of images and temples was instituted as hegemonic in the definition of kingship in early Kashmir. So this theism is what is being, and this liturgy is what is being subscribed to by every king and queen over these 2000 years that are being documented. So these royal sacred constructions were meant not just typically for divine legitimation of rule. So I want to make a subtle distinction here. The typical interpretation by historians of this act of donations, right, to whether they are Hindus or Buddhists or whoever, the typical interpretation is that this is for legitimation of rule, divine legitimation. But I argue in the context of the Raj Tarangini that these were actually a part of other kinds of political communication as well. It's not as simple as that. For example, appearing to right the wrongs perpetrated by the previous ruler. So this is seen in the 10th century, for example, when King Uchala restores the shrines that were spoiled and looted by King Harsha, who he had deposed. So King Uchala deposes King Harsha and then restores the shrines that he is supposed to have looted. Conversely, claiming the legacy and mantle of great rulers of the past is also seen in the same fashion. So you have the 12th century King Jaya Singh completing the consecrations that were initiated by Kings Lalitaditya and Avantivarman many centuries before him. So 12th century king completing constructions initiated by an 8th and a 9th century king. And these were, of course, Lalitaditya and Avanti Varman, iconic kings of Kashmir. I won't go into the reasons why. You can read about that in the book. So what is Jai Singh doing here? A king of relatively less stature. He's actually trying to draw on the tremendous reputation of the earlier kings. But that's not all, okay? So this is the second aspect of the political character of the sacred in Kashmir. You also find the tirthas, the sacred sanctuaries, doubling as political sanctuaries. That is, as asylums, where abdicating or ailing kings and courtiers, sometimes complete with their militia, actually took refuge. And if you have seen any of the ruins of these gigantic tirthas and temple spots in Kashmir, Martand is a well-known one. You would have seen it in the Bollywood movie Haider, and more recently in a lot of imagery that's been going around online. You will see how gigantic it is. Martanda temple is actually built like a fort. So you have this huge citadel in the middle, which is the shrine itself, but you also have a fortification built around it. So there's a temple, but it is also doubling up in times of need as a resort for political men and their militias. And what are these tirthas? Again, very real spots. Vijayesh, which is Vijbror, Varaha Kshetra, Sureshwari, and Chakradhar. It's all documented by Kalhan. What is even more incongruous is that these same tirthas, they become veritable theaters of war. When ousted kings, rebels, or truant courtiers who are on the run take shelter within their ramparts. So you actually see battles going on at these sacred spots, which is quite unique. And the Kashmiri subjects who often found themselves, caught in the midst of this civil war and insurrection, they are also described as sometimes fleeing to the safety of this tirtha or that, like Chakradhar Tirtha. So this is the third dimension in which the spiritual and the political are very close together. And one not less than this, but nonetheless very unique to Kashmiri history, the Tirtha also emerges as a site for political protest and negotiation. How does this happen? Priest conclaves, groups of priests, and as I said, this practice seems to be very special to early Kashmir. They organize sit-ins and hunger strikes. So that you actually find the term for hunger strikes, anshana. Against what? Protesting against the king, protesting against royal inaction or even actions. What am I getting at? When you add all this up, the spiritual land of Kashmir, as represented, appears also as a troubled land. Upaplava Priya Desha, a country which delighted in insurrection, says Kalhan, and Swabheda Vidhuram Mandalam, a realm unhappy through its own factions. Now, this is how Kalhan is describing the land very stoically. So the disturbed land of Kashmir in this sense was the antithesis of that political principle which is closest to Kalhan's heart, namely a strong monarchy. Hence, Kalhan's painstaking reportage of the various players and factors that weakened kingship in Kashmir. So, who do these include? Who are the villains of Kalhan's story? The militiamen, the tantrins. These are the unruly landed elements. And then the damaras, on the other hand, both of whom often took to arms and joined rebel conspirators or enemy forces when they were invading Kashmir. This is one lot. And then on the other hand, Brahmin activists of the kind that I mentioned who organize mass hunger strikes against the king are also caricatured and lampooned by Kalhan. So complicating the social location of this text. It is not as easy as to say that this is a Brahminical narrative, as it were. Most of all, however, it is the courtiers, mantrin, and the official functionaries, kayastha, as a class, who are attacked by Kalhan as Praja Rogaha, pestilence of the people. Why? For, quote, robbing the subjects by taking bribes, extracting heavy taxation, even in drought, embezzling funds. And Kalhan attacks them also for their sycophancy, treachery, and licentious lifestyles. Finally, and most importantly, however, perhaps the biggest cause of sorrow for Kalhan is a series of dissolute Kashmiri kings themselves, who Kalhan documents with all the concern and contempt at his disposal. I'm not going to go into details, but it's all there in the book. The point is that moral corruption then is seen as the bane of the administration of Kashmir across time and the cause of the people's endless woes. So Kalhan is very explicit about invoking the suffering of the people as his criterion for judging how to rank which king, how to assess which king. And this is what, ladies and gentlemen, Kalhan's highly ethicized commentary revolves around. And this is something that has not quite been noticed before. So what do we get? The imagined landscape of Kashmir then, pristine, holy, spiritual, is thus set off against the unholy and troubled contempts occurring therein. Do you see the contrast? So geography and polity are brought together in a stunning contrast. And this contrast is built into this unified poetic scheme. This clash between the nature of the land and the strife amidst its people could not have been lost on Kalhan. It essays the mixed feelings with which he seems to have undertaken to represent his country. Feelings of sneha lajja shoka anvita. Sneha lajja shoka anvita. Love woven with shame and sorrow. More significantly, this narration, this complex, multifaceted narration, attests how physical and sacred geography could be synergistically implicated in a political critique in the process of giving expression to the history and identity of a region. That'll be all by way of the talk. Allow me to show you just a few slides very quickly to give you a sense of how this was certainly a textual rendering of the region, but no less real, material, and vivid a landscape that we're looking at here. Is that okay? Can I share a PPT, Anilji? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please share the screen.
Yes, give me just a moment. I will just pull up my PowerPoint. It's a very, very brief PPT, but I think it will suffice to show you what I'm trying to say. Can you see my screen? Can I see?
Yeah, we can see, please.
Okay, perfect. Now I'm looking for the slideshow, which is, as usual, elusive. All right. Broadly, this is the region we are looking at. You're all, of course, familiar with this. Here is a in focus idea of the real geography of the valley. You can see it as an intermontane valley between the Zanskar range and the Pir Panjal range. And it runs in a southeast to northwest slope. And you have the Jhelum River. I don't know if you can see her clearly here. She's running in that direction from the southeast to the northwest. And then at Baramulla, she takes a very sudden turn westwards and sharp turn. And that's the gorge, actually, the Baramulla gorge of Jhelum is the route by which Swansang actually entered Kashmir. So there is a proper pass It's called the Baramulla Pass there. Here is a close-up of the same thing. You can see Srinagar, Baramulla, which I referred to today, as mentioned in the Rajtarangi, the Varahamul is what it is known as, Anantnag, the Banihal Pass. So that's what's interesting about the valley. She has been typically represented as an isolated part of the subcontinent, whereas in fact she was surrounded by many passes all around, both Zojila going towards Ladakh, towards the north going to Chilas and Gilgit and Hunza, and towards the west, of course, opening directly onto Peshawar, which is the Takshashila region, the Gandharan region of the past. And then, of course, towards the south and the southeast, you have the Banihal Pass and others. So Kashmir was never isolated. She actually has one of the most incredible connected histories from early times. And my slide has to stop working on that note. All right. Now here is a map that we made for my book, and I would love for you to actually see the original map. What have I plotted here? I have plotted all the places that Kalhan is telling us about across these 8,000 years. So none of this is a modern addition, and yet it tallies exactly with how we know the Valley of Kashmir and its complete physiography. You can see the Wular Lake, which is Mahapadmanaga, is also Naga, and it's the largest freshwater lake in South Asia. I think it used to be. And in Kalhan is talking about it and naming it as the Mahapadma. You see the Dal Lake, you see a variety of the Peethas. See the Sharda Peeth in North Kashmir. You have Nandik Kshetra. Then these two broad divisions, please note, Kramarajya and Madavarajya. Kanras and Maras. So in Kashmiri, they're known as Kanras and Maras. Till today, they're known as this. So remarkable continuity, because Kalhan is telling you about this regional division of the Valley of Kashmir. Basically, the northern valley of the Vitasta and the southern valley. So Kramarajya and Madavarajya. You will note Verinag. I mentioned Verinag, again referred to as Neelakunda, the home of Neelanag, the king of Kashmir, according to Kalhan. And you see that in the bottom as the origin of Jhelum. That is Vitasta. Vitasta is river Jhelum, and she's flowing, as I said, in a southeast northwesterly direction. You see the Baramulla Pass to the left, the Pir Panjal. I draw your attention to the extreme right. The Amarnath cave is also plotted then, so is the Sheshanag. Here is another view, and this is a cross section, as it were. And you can see similar sites which are located, but in a different perspective now. This is actually looking at the valley as if standing in Banihal Pass, as if standing outside of the valley. Something of a drone's view, if you like, of the valley. And again, this is based entirely on references in the Rajtarangini. This is, of course, just the connected histories that I was talking about. This is an additional dimension to doing regional history that is waiting to be explored for many, many regions of the Indian subcontinent. Basically, the astonishing interconnections between Kashmir and different corners of the Indian subcontinent, which were somehow not compiled and not pulled together before. And they reveal an incredible history. And in the long durée, this is over at least 2,500 years that these connections were alive between Kashmir and the rest. And migrations played a very central role in this. The more I have been researching this, even after my book, the more I realized that the extensive migrations, not just from other parts of India, even remote corners, okay? I mean, mind-boggling. You have groups coming from Gauda in Bengal, exactly where you are, and they are migrating to Kashmir and settling there. Assam, Cholas in the south, meaning Tamilakam in the south. You're getting people from there, Karnataka as well. Saurashtra, Malwa, Lat, entire Uttar Pradesh. And it's not just people, but it's also ideas. It's also script writing systems, its languages. All of these are going back and forth. So it's not just the immediate vicinity of Kashmir, which is Jammu, Peshawar, Kangra in Himachal. Of course, it is very intensely connected with these areas and with Gilgit and Hunza. But what is really astonishing is the expanse of these connections. So you have migrations not only from different parts of India settling in Kashmir, this is quite mind-boggling, but you see the opposite in action as well. You're getting any number of epigraphic references and textual references to people from Kashmir, residents of Kashmir, who are described as such, people from Kashmir Desha, actually migrating to other parts of the country, including as far south as Andhra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, and settling there and actually acquiring land there. And all of this is described in inscriptions that you're getting from sites like Chittambaram, etc. So this is what we were looking at today is a zoomed in analysis, an analysis from within, as it were, of how a region emerges and the kind of meanings that it is understood to accumulate over time, and how these are represented by a social actor who is a Kashmiri. But this connected histories was just the last kind of tantalizing little hint I wanted to leave you with, is the external, is when you zoom out and look at a region and locate her within the supra region. And that actually helps you understand many other aspects of the evolution of her cultural identity in the long term. So thank you very much. That's what I have for today.
So I think, thank you, Dr. Kaul, for your what should I say, Sabyasachi? I think mesmerizing was the right word. No? Is the right word. Actually, Sabyasachi is also sitting in front of us. Dr. Sabyasachi, my colleague. And I missed one colleague of mine, Dr. Sarita Khetri. She is actually, she has joined online because of her ill health. So, Sarita Di, please put on your mic and say hello. And so with this fascinating lecture, this was expected to all of us, and particularly this was actually enlightening for the students because till now in Indian universities, ancient history of Kashmir and early medieval history of Kashmir are not dealt seriously. So thank you very much for enlightening all of us, particularly the students. They'll be enriched and they will continue with understanding the history of Kashmir and the connects with other parts of the subcontinent. Kashmir connects with the other parts of the continent because from medieval period we get many things about Kashmir, but ancient part, although we have the earliest text, Rajtarangani, but still people have not worked it, and we all are thankful to Dr. Kaul that she has worked meticulously on this text and she has drawn a wonderful map of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you very much to the participants who joined online, particularly our seniors, Professor Harvansh Mukhia sir, Professor Aluka Parasar ma'am, and thank you others. Many of our students are there and colleagues have also joined online. So thank you all of you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shonaleeka.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And please keep on cooperating us. We may disturb you once more.
It will be a pleasure. It will be a pleasure. My very best wishes. And I want to commend your department for this wonderful initiative, because if there is a scholar who deserves a recognition and an honor like this, it is Professor B.D. Chattopadhyaya. So
actually, I didn't mention this today because earlier in the first inaugural lecture, I mentioned this. Actually, BDCs had a great role in shaping our department. Initially, fine, it was Indology department, which started by Rabindranath Tagore in 1950s. Sorry, prior to that, in 1950s, it was taken over by some important scholars. But when BDC joined in the early 80s, he actually carved this department into ancient Indian history, culture, and archaeology department. And we have, School of Historical Studies also. So in undergraduate courses, we teach jointly with our modern history department. So all this, syllabus crafting thing was done by Professor V.D. Chattopadhyaya. And in the previous talk, I have said these things that even recently we revised or restructured the whole syllabus. BDC was suffering. He was, I think, on dialysis. And still he came Shanti Niketan on our request, and he spent 3-4 days with her. And he was instrumental. He was the chairperson of that syllabus revision committee. And he did all the hard work. And after that, he went Kolkata. When he returned, and we heard very sad news that he was immediately hospitalized for a couple of days. So we still remember all those things. So great respect for him.
Anilji, same for Center for Historical Studies, I dare say. Of course, we saw a number of doyens coming together to form the Center for Historical Studies. But Professor Chattopadhyaya's courses remain some of the most rigorous and foundational to early Indian history at CHS. And it's I'm very proud to say that I have now the opportunity to be teaching the same courses that I studied from him as an MA student. So epigraphy and historical geography and so on. So his legacy is, without doubt, it's never going to end.
Yeah, true. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.